All right, I think it's time to begin. Let me do a quick sound check that everything is good on your end and on my end. I'm waiting for confirmation. Sound is good. Excellent. Well, a warm welcome to everyone, whichever part of the world you're at, whether you're Western US, Europe, Middle East. I see that there are participants from all over the globe, which makes it so exciting and so fascinating to run these webinar series. This is the very last part in the 8-part webinar series that we've been running with SpeakerHub on developing and improving your speaking business. And it's fascinating to be part of it. And this time I'm not only moderating, but I'm actually the speaker. And the topic of today is making your message stick, which relates not only to your pitch that you're going to be giving to the event planners, but also the presentation itself. It's so important to make a great impression on the audience. So one of them, or preferably more of them, are going to love you so much that they're gonna invite you back and they're going to refer you as a speaker and help you gain traction and develop your speaking business. Now, about me, SpeakerHub is my baby, and we launched about a year ago, as many of you would know. Those of you who have not yet signed up and you don't have a profile yet, please do. You're more than welcome to join for free. We don't charge any commission fee, and we're helping to connect you with event planners. Now, a few words about my background. I started my career as a European official. I used to work for what the Americans would say the federal government in Europe, and I had a book which helps anyone who was aspiring for such career called the Test Book, which so far over the years has sold over 80,000 copies. And right now I'm also working with an organization called Public Affairs Council, and that's where the idea of SpeakerHub came from, where I organize a lot of events and I speak at a lot of events, and I thought that others may have the same issue, the same problem of finding good speakers for their events and also promoting themselves and trying to get visibility as a speaker. But enough about me, and let's get to the subject. Now, making your presentation or pitch stick, everything starts with the elevator pitch. Everything starts with you being able to tell a stranger about your speaking topic in 60 seconds. When you are at a networking event, when you are talking with a neighbor or a coworker, and they say, wow, you really speak? That's great. What is your topic? Now, telling them in 60 seconds may be easy on the face of it because you just cut down and narrow what the topic is, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to stick. So the question is it even possible to tell a compelling message in a minute? And I think it's possible to tell one even in fewer than 140 characters, actually. And I give you an example from a funny or maybe scary tweet that I came across some time ago. And it says, you hear your wife singing to your newborn baby on the baby monitor and smile. Your smile fades as she texts you, be home late, traffic. So this is a mini story in 140 characters, and hopefully it doesn't make you cringe too much, but it does trigger some sort of emotional reaction. Now, if you look at a story like this, we might wonder, why is it so effective even though it's such a short 140 character mini story? And the answer is partly found in this amazing, fascinating, fantastic book that I recommend everyone to read and memorize and internalize, which is called Made to Stick. And Made to Stick is what we're going to use today for our webinar. I'm going to walk you through a couple of the methods that Made to Stick talks about, and we're going to reverse engineer that, and we're going to apply those methods for a speaking presentation or a pitch that you are going to do in the next few months, weeks, or years when you are applying to speak at various events. And of course, this is a spoiler alert because you will hear the key messages in the book, but the bottom line is that we want to apply that for your speaking career. Now, the number one principle in any speaking presentation, any speaker pitch, is that it has to be simple. Now, this is probably something you've heard so many times over the years, and you may be wondering, okay, simple, I get it. But let's dig a little deeper and let's try to understand in depth, what does simple really mean? And there is an Albert Einstein quote, just like there's an Albert Einstein quote for everything these days, even things he's never said. But this one he actually did say. And he said everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler. Fine, great, we get the idea. I'll give you an example, and after reading it, I'll ask you whether it is simple or not. Let me read it out. This is from a trade association's description of what they deal with. And the trade association deals with trade repositories. Now, I'm not an economist. I'm not a financial services expert. So here's what they say. Trade repositories centrally collect and maintain the records of derivatives. They play a central role in enhancing transparency of derivative markets and reducing risks to financial stability. Now, if anyone on this call or watching the recording later, if anyone is a financial services expert, might say, you know what, this is pretty obvious. But I think for the 99% of us, this is not obvious. And this is not so clear. Now, what is the fundamental mistake that those who wrote this committed? Now, that fundamental mistake has a name, and that name is called the curse of knowledge. Now, curse of knowledge is basically the concept that you cannot unlearn what you have already learned, or at least it's very difficult to unlearn what you've already learned. So from your vantage point, from your perspective, it might be obvious because you're an expert. You're maybe an expert on domestic violence, maybe you're an expert on leadership, maybe you're an expert on a related area. And it's very difficult to use terminology, to use words, even a description which doesn't have jargon, which doesn't have the technical terms, which is not obvious for those not in that field. Now, so rule number one is to be extremely aware and careful when it comes to the curse of knowledge. And it's often difficult to judge or evaluate ourselves and ask ourselves, did I commit this fundamental error? And the best thing is you try to bounce off ideas with non-experts, bounce off your speaking pitch with non-experts. And the broader your audience, the less jargon you can use, the fewer technical terms you can use. If you're giving a TEDx talk or a TED talk, if you're lucky enough, that's a very broad audience. You cannot use those terms. But one thing you can do if you have to use some technical terms is you define those. So once you say, this is what trade repository is, and you define that in layman terms, then it's fine. Now, I'll give you another example, and I'll challenge you, and I ask you to type into the chat box what headline you would give for this story. You're a student. Imagine that you're a student again. Some of you might be right now, but let's say you're a student again, and you're writing an article for the school newspaper. So here's the gist of the story, and let's try to find a good title for this. All teachers are required to attend workshops each year to keep up with the latest educational methods. When they join this annual event tomorrow, the focus will be on how social media affects student attention span. Though students will stay at home, teachers will have many stories to share. So let's see, everyone on the call from Hawaii to the Middle East, give me ideas, type into the chat box, what title would you give for this story? Try to simplify it in a sense that the title will reflect the idea. Social media in the classroom, teacher, school, and social media. Social media affects students' attention span. Social media training for teachers. All right, keep it coming. Type a couple more, and then I'll give you my solution, my idea of condensing it and simplifying it. Learn how social media engages students. Teachers learn how to increase student attention span. Very good solutions, very good solutions. But here comes the twist. My idea about giving a title for the story, and remember, you're a student writing an article for the school newspaper. What is the core message here? Well, the core message is there's no school tomorrow because teachers are out. The teachers are having a day away for training. And you're a student and you couldn't care less about what they talk about social media. You care that there's no school tomorrow. So what I did now is I didn't want to trick you. I hope you don't take offense. I wanted to challenge you and to raise your awareness that when you have a story like this, what is our number one effort or the way we approach the simplification challenge? Well, the way we do that, we usually pick words from the text that we'd like to simplify and rehash it. We try to reword it, try to find alternatives, try to find some sort of synonyms. But that's not the way. The way to do that is try to look for the core message of your pitch. Try to look for the real meaning of it. And finding the real meaning means you take a step back and you're trying to look at what's the real story there without recycling, without reusing the words that are in the description. So here, there was nowhere written that there's no school tomorrow, but that's the essence of the story. So that's another way of simplifying not only your pitch, but ultimately your presentation. And here's the next thing. The next thing of simplification, it's often very difficult because when you talk about something new, when your method, your approach is innovative, it's novel, it's modern, it's very difficult to describe something that doesn't exist, because that's the very definition of an innovative idea or approach. So here was this issue back at the end of the 19th century when the car was invented. It was very difficult to explain what the hell it was, because you just say that it's a steam-driven engine that transports people fast. It's very complex and it just doesn't do service to what the car is. Now, it was difficult to describe it because people really didn't know this technology. So what was the idea? They used the analogy saying it's a horseless carriage, because everyone was familiar with carriages. They knew what that was. So that was the anchor. That was the reference point to describe something that was novel. So in your topic, in your area, you need to find that anchor that everyone can relate to, or there's general knowledge, or there's some sort of information that others already know and you can use it. I'll give another example. I don't have a slide on that, but I often refer to that example. When the fizzy drink, the carbonated drink 7-Up came out, and I think it was 7-Up, they tried to position themselves as a new product. And they were thinking, how do we do that? How do we make sure that people understand what we are? So we are the un-cola. We are not Coke. So they defined themselves to something because everyone knew the other competitive product. So that idea of anchoring and trying to find what do people know is a powerful one, because it helps you simplify your message instead of going into a long, detailed, complicated description. So principle number one, make it simple. Let's look at number two, unexpected. Now, unexpected, interesting concept. It's not easy to pull off something unexpected. And of course, as a speaker, the last thing you want to be unexpected is some technical glitch on your presentation or an unexpected audience member who starts to heckle you. That's really not something you'd like to have. But unexpected can be built into your presentation. And let me give you one example, and again, challenge you once more. I'll give you a little quiz. It's totally unrelated to the speaking or intellectual challenge that I'm putting out there. And I'll tell you why I'm doing that. But why don't you look at it, and why don't you type, say, A, B, or C, or first, second, third, fourth, whichever you think. So which one of these that you see on the screen, the three biggest economies in the world, which one is really the largest? And then the second largest and the third. So which one is the correct answer? Let's see. Try to type it in. Some people say fourth or the second. So is the European Union, the US, or China? Which economies are the biggest? Number 4, B. All sorts of answers coming in. Excellent. Now, I'll tell you, the thing is, it's the first one. The European Union, as the collection of 28 countries in the world, that's the largest economy in the world right now, which hopefully to some extent will surprise you, because you would say, really? I thought the US was the biggest. I thought China was the biggest. So the question is, this piece of information that the European Union and then the US and China, these are the biggest economies in this order, may have a tiny bit of surprise element to you. And that brings me to my point, bringing an element of surprise, something that the audience will say, really? That should help them remember your presentation. That should help them remember your key points. So if you can bring it a little quiz like that, or just put your hands up who think this way or who think that way, putting in a quiz can help to a great extent. There's another one. This is more on the funny side. There's a website. I love that. You see in the bottom right the URL. It's a website where this guy collects these weird correlations. And what you see here is the per capita consumption of mozzarella cheese correlates with the number of civil engineering doctorates awarded. Now, isn't that crazy? It doesn't make any sense, of course, but it's just a weird thing that these two completely unrelated pieces of statistics, they correlate. They have something to do with each other, but more than a thing, it's almost a perfect correlation. So if people start eating more mozzarella cheese, maybe the civil engineering doctorates get awarded. So on that side, you've got this crazy thing of statistics like that. Now again, if you are presenting to a food trade association or a corporate audience, or you're talking about or talking to civil engineers, you might want to show a chart like that, and you'll immediately get the audience's attention. You'll immediately say, oh really, wow, that's cute, that's funny, and that's relevant. At the same time, it's unexpected. Who would have thought? So if you can bring in that sort of element, definitely going to help your pitch, your presentation to be more memorable. Here's an example, and let me ask you again, do you think this is unexpected? Let's say you're running a company and you say, our company wants to forge new economic opportunities that will sustain and grow jobs in the face of significant global challenges. Do you think this is unexpected? Do you think that there's any twist that would make the audience remember, or at least sit up and pay attention to what you have to say? And we see little answers. No, I completely agree with you. I think it's painful. It's physically painful to read such a gobbledygook like that. It just doesn't make any sense. I'll give you a better example that I found, and it's a cute example. When back then, a couple of years ago, Barack Obama, as the American president, was coming to Brussels, and one of the journalists here tweeted these two pictures, and it says how the American president arrives, you see it on the left side, and how the Dutch prime minister arrives, so from the Netherlands. And it's got a bit of political spin to it, a bit of a political edge to it, but it's an unexpected thing. It puts things in contrast, and you see on top of the slide, it says, I wouldn't have guessed. It's something that did surprise a lot of people, so immediately they could relate to that. Here's another example, one of my personal favorites. So you see on the picture two distinguished, an actor and a lawyer. It says internationally acclaimed barrister Amal Alamuddin marries an actor. And this is fascinating because everybody, all the newspapers, all the websites, blogs, everything was just full of the news of George Clooney finally getting married. And what they did here is they communicated the very same news from a different perspective. So something that everyone knew, but they put that in a different perspective, in an unexpected perspective. And that's exactly what did the trick. That really made this so memorable. So number two, simple and unexpected. Number three, concrete. Concrete, not necessarily in a materialistic sense, but concrete as specific. Now, let's look at this. Let's look at another example or two examples and tell me whether that's concrete enough, specific enough or not. I speak about energizing the audience and help them achieve their goals. My approach is bold and I deliver an innovative way of helping minority groups. Do you think that's concrete? And yeah, I have to agree with you. I absolutely have to agree with you because this is not concrete enough. And that's a very, very common mistake in pitches, in presentations, in workshops, in so many formats of speaking, that it's too abstract. It's not specific enough. It's not concrete enough. So what can you do to make your presentation or your pitch more specific? Here are a couple of ideas. You can always add figures, and you can say, I've spoken about this topic to 82 groups, a very specific figure. You can drop in some known names. You say Angelina Jolie was our goodwill ambassador, or a brand name, or someone, a celebrity, or someone that you have had some connection to. You can put in proportions. You say they grew faster than Google did in their first 2 years of operation. And you can always give an example of what you do in a very, again, specific manner. You say, do you remember in the news when something happened? Well, I was dealing with that specific issue on a daily basis. I see this all the time. When I see speakers applying for opportunities and gigs, whether on SpeakerHub or elsewhere, I see those pitches not being specific enough. They're full of adjectives, they're full of big words, but they are still lacking the concreteness. So make sure that you're very, very well aware of this specific criterion. So let's see number 4, and this one is a tricky one. So we had simple, unexpected, concrete, credible. Now, credibility is such an interesting thing. Credibility from one perspective, it means authentic. And you come across as authentic starting from your photo. And I know that a lot of you would take a professional photographer to use your headshot, and I'm also an example for that, the one you see on your screens. Well, that was done by a professional photographer, and I'm hoping to believe that I come across as an authentic, at least on the photo. I dare to believe on the webinar as well. What I'm saying here, that something that's too polished, that's too perfect, that's too chiseled, it's not going to come across as authentic starting with a photo. So let me ask you this question, and let's do a little brainstorming, a little bit of typing again. What makes you a credible speaker? So give me ideas. What makes you credible in the eyes of an event planner? Why do you think you have the creds to speak at their event? You can give different elements, different ideas. Just type in the box. Testimonials, that's great. Books, experience, very good. Relatability, hard to pass that message, but I totally agree. Experience with the subject, which is something you probably know, but you need to pass that message to the event planner. So PhD certainly helps, and 3 years of experience. So if it's absolutely clear from your resume, from your profile, or anything else, that definitely helps. Books, mastery, and others. Very good. Thank you. Thank you. Great ideas and great input. Let me give you a couple of perspectives on what gives credibility to a speaker or to an expert on a topic. So here's one that can play or it can backfire. One is the company's reputation. Let's say if you're working for IBM. Well, IBM has a good reputation, so that reputation can reflect on you, so you get a lot of additional brownie points or additional credibility points, saying that you have that personal credibility because you're working with that particular company. But if you are working with, let's say, a more controversial industry or tobacco industry, that can definitely backfire, especially if you're talking to an audience which may be very skeptical or hostile to that particular company. So that's one aspect. The other is academic background. So someone here, one of you mentioned you have a PhD. Now that's fantastic. That immediately gives additional credibility points in the eyes of an event planner, well, as long as your academic qualifications match the event and match the focus of the presentation. Then you have personal knowledge. You may not have those formal credibility elements, but you have a lot of personal knowledge that definitely helps, especially if you can showcase that through your website, through your book, through your blog, through your social media presence. Publications and online presence is the next one. So that again adds to your credibility score. And authenticity. And someone here mentioned relatability. Authenticity is very similar to that. Authenticity, at least the way I look at it, is very situational. So if you go there, you start presenting to an audience, they need to feel that you can relate to them indeed, that you're authentic, your body language, the way you're dressed, the words that you use, the message that you're delivering is really matching their expectations, so they give you the credibility. And a very good way of being credible is starting with the why. Often they would say starting with your story, but starting with the why you're doing what you're doing. Really going to the core before you start going into the technical details. And another very important element to keep in mind is that when it comes to credibility, some people, some audiences, some event planners, they just want to believe certain things. We all have our cognitive biases. We all have certain prejudices, and we try to fight against that, and we try to be aware of that. But we all have that. So if someone on the other end of the event organizing side just has a very, very different mindset, a different approach, or different value set from the one that you're projecting, you just need to be aware that you can be very effective in communication. The credibility may not be there. So here's my wisdom for today to share with you. The credibility coefficient, it's a term that I coined for this situation. So credibility in communication is pretty much like a variable in a formula. So if it's 0, everything else in the communication is nullified. You're just simply not going to be heard because you are not perceived as credible. Whatever you do, you can have your PhD, you can be concrete, you can be unexpected, you can be anything you'd like, but if credibility for some reason, because of your background, because of where you work, because of whatever reason it may be, if it's missing, you're not going to be heard. So it's something to be very conscious of when you are pitching or when you're presenting. Now here's number 5 in our list of 6 elements. It's being emotional. Now that's a very, very important one. It's relatively easy to be emotional, but not all emotions are created equal. What do I mean by that? I mean, you remember the Twitter story that I showed you at the very beginning. It did trigger some sort of emotion, I hope to believe. And here's the question to you. Which emotions do you think work in a pitch or in a presentation? Try to type a couple of emotions, types of emotions that you think can work, that help your speaking business, that helps your speaking pitch to succeed. Joy, that's a very good one. Excitement, fear, a very important one. Absolutely. Hope, very good one. So on the positive and negative side, courage, empathy, absolutely. Humor, yes. Surprise, if it's an emotion, yes. Eventual gain, again, okay. Tears, passion, very good ones. Curiosity, very, very good answers. You're a great group. Really, really enjoying that. Very much appreciated. So here's my take on the emotional side. Emotions, when it comes to humor, some of you mentioned inspiration, love, and sometimes even ridicule can work. Now, of course, ridicule is a super sensitive and tricky one. But if you look at a couple of comedians, you look at John Oliver, you look at Saturday Night Live, you look at a couple of famous shows like that, very often they operate with ridicule because they know they are speaking to a group that has one value set and they laugh at someone who's the out group, who is not there, so they can afford themselves to ridicule. The other ones, especially to an audience that you may not know so well or you want to play it safe, love, inspiration, humor, all of this can work work very well. But here comes the trick, that some emotions just don't work. And anger and sadness are the kind of emotions that generally are not advised to be used. Why do I say that? Now, anger, we're often angry. I'm angry if I get a parking ticket. I'm really, really upset. But it's not something I'm ever going to talk about or I'm not going to share on social media. On the other hand, if you look at outrage, that's something that triggers action, that you want to feel that you have a certain influence on things. If I feel that if I sign a petition, if I get the audience to cheer, to stand up, to agree with me, outrage can be a great trigger. So try to distinguish between these two fundamental emotions. And the same thing with sadness against fear. Well, if I mentioned the first example, or let's say my pet passes away, I'm sad, but it's probably not something that I would turn into any sort of speech or pitch. But fear can definitely be a very powerful emotion that you can mobilize. So here's a picture. Tell me what emotion this picture can trigger. What emotion do you feel when you look at this old gentleman kneeling at a tank? Honor, fear, or do you stay neutral? Do you think that this is a picture, you look at it and say, well, it doesn't trigger any emotion whatsoever in me? Sadness, regret, wisdom of age, compassion, very, very good one. So I hope I made it clear that a good image can really trigger a lot of emotions. You're not going to stay neutral when it comes to an image like that. Now, on a happier note, what emotion does this cuteness on the picture, what does it trigger? What do you feel when you look at this picture? And I think it's from Humans of New York. They've got this sort of subsection when they say, today in my profession. So this is my profession, and hope, love, glee, affection, precious life, exactly. So again, you look at this picture, there's some sort of emotion. Now, with the emotion, very important element is that you need to connect that to your talk. You need to connect that to the pitch. It's essential that the emotion is not self-serving. Here I'm using it to demonstrate a certain point, but if I were to talk about a specific subject, a specific topic, I really would need to find not just a cute little baby, but I need to connect that to the key message that I'm trying to convey. So we did that. Now, for instance, you can even be emotional in a pitch. You can even be emotional in a single sentence. You can say, it's humbling to know that my work changes people's lives. Humbling. It does I convey the emotion of honor. Or I say, when I deliver a 30-minute talk, most of what I say is forgotten. But if I manage to convince only one kid not to do drugs, as a result, it's worth it. Which emotion is this? Probably inspiration. So I managed to convey in a single sentence a very powerful emotion that say, I inspire, or I am inspired by the kind of task or by the work that I do. And then the very last one is probably pretty obvious. It's story. So what did we have? We had simple, unexpected, concrete, credible, emotional story. Message here, how can you craft a story? And story is not necessarily Hollywood. Hollywood is the world's probably preeminent story factory. But remember the tweet. That tweet in 140 characters was a story. Anything can be a story. Your pitch in 100 words or 50 words that you're sending to an event planner can be a story. So if you manage to craft that in such a short space, then you nailed it. So what makes a story? Let me ask you, what makes a story? What are the elements of whether that tweet, whether your pitch, whether your entire presentation, What makes a story? Some conflict. Very, very good point, Bernadette. Thanks. And something others can relate to. It's probably the result of it, not necessarily an internal element, but something that happened, yes, ideally, that has some roots in reality. It has a beginning, middle, and an end. That's a structural part. Personal, very good one, that it's you, because we are in the speaking business. Speakers are individuals, they're persons, personalities, not something that happened to someone else. A lesson. There's some sort of an outcome, some sort of dramatic outcome, maybe how I survived, that there's a character in that. That could be you, or that could be that kid whose lives you saved with your speech. And there is ideally a call to action. Very, very good elements, and I truly appreciate your input. Very, very good ones. Now, I'll give you an example. 2 pictures, and I'll tell you a story. And the story, some of you might know this picture, it's a pretty famous one, it's an operation. It's an operation that happened, I think, about 35, maybe even 40 years ago. And you see that there is a surgeon and there is the patient on the operating, on the bed. And if you look closely enough on the right side, you see the assistant of the surgeon sleeping in the corner because this operation lasted 23 hours. Now, this operation was the world's very first heart transplant. So what you see here is actually the guy who was on that bed. He was the guy up there whose life was saved over 40 years ago by that surgeon who spent 23 hours operating his heart. And he's there, and he had several decades to live. So I use this picture when I talk about science, and I talk about the importance and the significance of what science can deliver. And it's 2 pictures without a single word on either. How much time did I spend explaining it? About a minute, maybe not even. And this is a story because it had some drama, it had a character, it had a beginning, it had an outcome, and it had an inspiring message to it. So with these 2 pictures, I hope I managed to convey a good story to you. So you can do that. You can apply that even without an image. If you are speaking, you can say, a few days ago, I met a colleague. He looked at me and said, and there you say something. When I was at university, and that's a different one. These 3 are not interrelated. Another example. So you say, when I was at university, I thought I'd never be a speaker. But then I had this amazing professor, and then you continue. Or a third example. Last time I met a government official, he asked me, don't you just want to let this issue go? So I said. And even in these 3 lines, there's a tiny bit of drama already built in. So that's something you can apply, whether as short as your presentation, your pitch, whether it's your speech to a large audience. All of this can be done only verbally, or if you have the luxury to use visuals, you can definitely take the time and look for those. So to sum it up, to make your presentation or your application or even your SpeakerHub profile stick and memorable, that event planners and agents and everyone else will come back to it and invite you, try to use as many of these 6 principles as you. Hopefully you can hear me now. I'm waiting for some confirmation. Yes, you can hear me. Good. So I used the telephone patch just to say thank you for everyone, and I'm very sorry for this technical glitch, but the unexpectedness, as I mentioned before, it actually did happen to me, and it wasn't planned for sure, but very, very grateful and thankful for your presence and all the questions, and hopefully this was interesting and relevant, so you can fine-tune both your presentation and any other written or oral communication that you may be doing. So this actually concludes our series with the Developing Your Speaking Business and Helping You as a Speaker series from SpeakerHub. We're planning to do another series probably next year, so stay tuned. Share the recording and the slides with others. We'll be sending that to you in a few days. So I think with that in mind, I thank you for your great participation and feedback and presence. And thanks very much for being here.